By the time the inquiry became official, the family that once ruled every room with confidence began to move like people walking on thin ice, careful with every step, careful with every word. Lila watched it happen from the side, not with joy, but with a deep, tired awareness of how slowly justice walks when power has a long shadow. Her sadness was still part of her, because nothing could return the years when she felt small at their table, when she heard laughter behind her back and pretended it was not about her. Her helplessness returned at night, when Victor lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling, whispering that his world was falling apart. She did not argue. She did not accuse. She simply listened, because she knew that truth does not need shouting, it only needs space. The first court notice arrived in a thin white envelope, almost like the one her father had given her at the wedding, and when Victor's mother saw it, her hands shook for the first time in Lila's presence. She tried to stay strong, tried to speak with authority, but her voice cracked as she said lawyers would fix everything. Victor's uncles gathered in dark suits and spoke of connections and favors, of judges who owed them, of journalists who could be bought. Lila heard it all and felt the old helplessness rise again, because she knew how strong these people were, how used they were to bending the world to their will. Yet inside that helplessness, a small, quiet hope lived, because now the truth was no longer only in her father's hands, it was written in official files, carried by strangers who had no reason to protect lies. She visited her father often, sitting in his small kitchen, drinking tea from chipped cups, listening to him speak about her childhood and her mother's laugh, as if he wanted to remind her of who she was before power tried to define her. He told her that patience is not waiting without moving, patience is moving slowly but never stopping. The hearings began without drama, in rooms that smelled of paper and old wood. Victor's father was called first, his face pale, his shoulders bent by years and secrets. He denied everything at first, his voice calm and practiced, but documents do not forget, and witnesses who had stayed silent for decades finally spoke. Lila was not in the room when he broke down, when he admitted that another man had been blamed so his company could survive, when he said he had lived with that guilt like a locked door inside his chest. The news reached her through a quiet phone call from her father. She closed her eyes and felt a strange mix of sadness and relief, because justice is never clean, it always carries the weight of what was lost. The newspapers changed their tone. The same family that had been praised for generosity was now described with careful words and raised eyebrows. Victor's mother stopped leaving the house. Invitations disappeared. Doors that once opened easily now stayed closed. Lila saw how fast influence melts when truth touches it, and for the first time, she did not feel small in their world. Victor stood by her, torn between love for his family and respect for the truth. One evening, he said he did not know who he was anymore, the son of a powerful man or the husband of a woman who refused to lie. Lila told him he did not have to choose between them, only between hiding and seeing. The final decision came quietly, without cameras, without shouting, in a short statement that acknowledged the past and promised compensation to the families of the workers who had died. It was not prison. It was not revenge. It was something heavier and more real, a public confession in a financial fall that stripped away the illusion of untouchable power. Victor's father resigned. The company was sold. The family name lost its shine. Lila watched it from a distance and felt the last stage arrive inside her, not anger, not triumph, but a calm sense of unexpected justice, the kind that does not dance, but simply stands where lies once stood. Victor's mother came to their apartment one afternoon, her face older, her eyes tired. She did not apologize with words, but she looked at Lila and said she had never understood why a man would give only a letter at a wedding. Now she did. Lila nodded. That was enough. Months later, Lila and Victor visited the small cemetery where her mother was buried. They stood in silence, and Lila felt something finally settle inside her. A long journey from sadness through helplessness, through quiet hope and patient waiting, to this moment where truth had spoken for her without her raising her voice. She was still quiet. She was still gentle. But she was no longer invisible. And every time she thought of the simple envelope, she understood that justice does not always arrive with noise or force. Sometimes it arrives in the hands of a father who believes his daughter deserves to stand without shame, and in the courage of a woman who waits long enough for truth to find its own way forward. After the envelope was read and Victor lowered himself onto the chair, the wedding hall did not return to its old joy, it only pretended to, and Lila felt that pretending was more painful than open cruelty. Music played again, but it sounded far away, like it was coming from another room. Guests whispered behind their glasses, and some looked at her with pity, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet fear, as if she had suddenly become dangerous without raising her voice. Her sadness deepened because she knew the letter did not erase the years when she had been treated like a guest who should be grateful for every breath. She remembered the first night she stayed in Victor's family home, how his mother had given her a small room near the kitchen and said it was temporary, how weeks passed and it stayed her room, how every family dinner felt like a test she was not meant to pass. She had been quiet then, and she was quiet now, standing in a white dress that felt too heavy for her shoulders. Victor finally stood up and asked for a short break, saying the bride needed air. He led her to a side hallway, and his hand trembled in hers. He said he did not know about the past, that his father had never spoken of it, and his voice sounded like a boy's voice, not a powerful man's. Lila listened and felt helpless because his confusion did not undo her pain, and his shock did not give her back the dignity she had lost in small moments over many months. His mother appeared behind them, her face tight and controlled, and she said this was not the time for drama, that the past was buried and should stay buried. Lila wanted to speak, but her throat closed, because helplessness is not loud, it is heavy. They returned to the hall, and the ceremony finished without warmth. People clapped out of habit, not joy. When it was time to sit, Lila noticed her father still in the back, still small in the large room, and something inside her shifted, a thin line of quiet hope. She walked to him and sat beside him for a moment, holding his hand under the table. He said nothing, only squeezed her fingers once, and that small gesture felt stronger than all the gifts on the tables. Victor's relatives avoided him now, not because they respected him, but because they feared what else he might know. The powerful family was still powerful, but their shine had a crack. After the guests left, Victor and Lila went to their new apartment. It was big and silent, filled with flowers that already smelled too sweet. Victor sat on the couch and said his family would never forgive this moment. Lila looked at the floor and said she never asked them to love her, only to see her. He did not answer. Days passed, and the story of the envelope moved through their circle like smoke. Some said her father was brave. Some said he was rude. Some said Lila was dangerous. Victor's mother stopped calling her by name and called her girl instead. At family dinners, they spoke around her, not to her. Lila felt the old sadness return, stronger now because she had tasted the idea of being respected for a moment and then lost it again. She felt helpless because she could not change their hearts, and she could not force Victor to choose sides. But inside her, something small stayed alive, a quiet hope that truth, once spoken, does not go back to sleep. She began visiting her father more often, sitting in the same small kitchen, listening to him talk about her mother, about how she used to say that patience is not weakness, it is waiting without lying to yourself. Lila held onto that sentence like a thread. She did not fight. She did not cry in front of them. She learned to wait with her eyes open. When Victor came home late and said his family wanted him to forget the letter, to treat it like a strange wedding story, Lila only said if they forget it, it will remember them. He looked at her and saw for the first time that her quiet voice did not mean an empty heart. And so the days moved forward, slow and tense, filled with sadness she could not erase, helplessness she could not escape, and a fragile, patient hope that somewhere ahead, the truth written in that simple envelope would stop being a secret and start becoming something stronger. As the weeks passed, the tension did not disappear, it only learned how to hide behind polite smiles and careful words. Lila woke up every morning feeling the same quiet sadness, because the house was full of comfort but empty of warmth, and every message from Victor's family reminded her that she was still seen as a mistake that had become permanent. At dinners, his mother spoke of traditions and reputation, and every sentence sounded like a warning. Lila felt helpless because no matter how respectfully she behaved, it changed nothing in their eyes. She remembered how Victor's aunt once laughed about her father's old jacket, how his cousin joked that love was easier when money paid for it, and how Victor had stayed silent in those moments, not out of cruelty, but out of fear. That silence now echoed louder than insults. Victor began coming home later, tired and restless, carrying the weight of two worlds on his shoulders. One evening, he said his uncle suggested they should rewrite the story of the factory accident, make it look like a misunderstanding, and that lawyers could handle the rest. Lila listened and felt something inside her grow still, like water before a storm. She felt helpless because power was moving again, trying to cover the truth with money and influence. That night, she could not sleep. She went to the window and watched the city lights, thinking about her childhood, about the small house near the edge of town, about how her father used to say that truth is slow but stubborn. In the morning, she went to him. She did not cry. She did not complain. She simply asked him what else he had kept from that old case. He opened a drawer and took out more papers, copies of reports, notes from a man who had died in prison for something he did not do, and a list of names that had been paid to stay silent. Lila held the pages and felt the sadness deepen, because she saw how long injustice had lived quietly in the dark. She also felt helpless, because these papers were small compared to the power of a rich family. But inside her chest, quiet hope began to breathe, because now the truth was not just a memory, it was something solid, something that could walk into the light. Victor's family announced a charity event for the families of the dead workers, smiling for cameras, speaking of responsibility and care. Lila watched it on television and felt the familiar humiliation rise again, because she knew it was not care, it was control. Victor came home and said his mother wanted him there without her, because her presence might bring up uncomfortable questions. Lila nodded and said nothing, but inside, patience was forming like a wall, stone by stone. She told Victor about the papers. His face changed. He said if those were made public, his family would be ruined. Lila said they had already ruined someone else first. Her voice was calm, but the words landed heavily. Days later, her father went with her to the courthouse and asked about reopening the case. The clerk looked at them with tired eyes, then at the documents, then back at them, and said it would take time. Lila felt helpless again, because time had always been the friend of powerful people. Still, she waited. She cooked. She cleaned. She listened. She watched. Victor argued with his family more often. His mother accused Lila of poisoning him against them. Lila did not defend herself. She had learned that patience is not silence without thought, it is silence with direction. One evening, Victor came home shaking and said his father had admitted the truth to him in private, that he had allowed another man to take the blame so the company would survive. Victor sat down and covered his face with his hands. Lila sat beside him and felt both his pain and her own. She did not celebrate. She did not accuse. She only said this is what truth feels like when it finally enters the room. Outside, rain began to fall, slow and steady, washing dust from the streets. Inside, two people sat between sadness and hope, between helplessness and patience, knowing that something was moving now, something they could no longer stop, and that the simple envelope from the wedding had become more than a letter. It had become a door, and that door was opening whether the powerful wanted it to or not. When the case was officially reopened, it did not happen with noise or headlines, it happened with a small notice on a courthouse board, written in plain words that most people would walk past without stopping. Lila stood there with her father and read it slowly, and inside her, the long road of sadness and helplessness reached its quiet turning point. She still remembered every moment of humiliation, every forced smile, every dinner where she felt like she did not belong, and those memories did not disappear, but now they stood beside something stronger, a calm and steady sense that truth had finally been invited into the room. Victor's family reacted the way powerful people often do when they feel the ground shift, with anger first, then denial, then fear. His uncles spoke of conspiracies. His mother said this was all a mistake, that old wounds should not be opened, that the past should be respected as history, not judged as crime. Lila listened to these words and felt the old helplessness try to return, but it did not stay, because patience had changed her from the inside. She did not need to fight them. She did not need to shout. She only needed to wait while the truth did what it always does when it is given light. The hearings were slow and painful. Witnesses came forward with shaking voices. Documents were read aloud in rooms that smelled of dust and regret. Victor's father sat with his head lowered, looking smaller than the man who once ruled boardrooms and banquets. When he finally spoke, he did not blame anyone else. He said he had been afraid of losing his company, afraid of losing his name, afraid of being nothing, and so he had chosen to let another man become nothing instead. His words did not sound like a villain's speech, they sounded like a tired confession, and that made them heavier. The families of the dead workers listened in silence, and some of them cried, not because justice felt sweet, but because it had taken so long. Lila sat in the back, holding her father's hand, and felt the last stage arrive inside her. Not excitement, not revenge, but emotional and unexpected justice, the kind that does not make you jump, but makes you breathe differently. The decision was simple and final. The old conviction was overturned. The company was fined and stripped of certain rights. Compensation was ordered. Victor's father resigned from every public position he held. The family name, once spoken with admiration, was now spoken with careful distance. There were no handcuffs, no dramatic arrests, only something far more painful for people who live on pride, public truth. Victor's mother did not come to see Lila for a long time. When she finally did, she stood in the doorway like a guest in her own son's home. She did not apologize in words. She said she had believed strength meant never admitting wrong, and now she saw that it only meant being alone. Lila listened and nodded. She did not forgive loudly. She did not punish. Her justice was not loud either. It was quiet, like her, and it lived in the fact that no one in that family could ever again say she was nothing. Victor changed too. He stopped trying to balance lies and love. He chose to stand where truth stood, even when it cost him comfort. One evening, months later, Lila and her father walked past the old factory grounds, now empty and fenced. The wind moved through broken windows, and the sky was pale with evening light. Her father said he never thought he would see this day. Lila said she never thought a simple envelope could carry so much weight. They stood there in silence, and for the first time, her sadness did not feel like a wound, it felt like a story that had reached its end. She had been quiet at the beginning. She had been humiliated and overlooked. She had felt helpless in rooms full of powerful people. Then she had found quiet hope in a letter, patience in waiting, and finally justice in truth that could no longer be hidden. And as she walked away from the factory with her father beside her and Victor waiting for her at home, she understood that the strongest thing she had ever done was not to fight loudly, but to endure without becoming bitter, and to let the truth speak in its own time, because sometimes the greatest victory does not look like applause, it looks like peace.